Hello everyone, this is Łukasz Gandecki, and today I want to show you how you can pick between useState and useReducer in React. And to start with, I will demonstrate when using useState might become problematic. So we have a very simple component here with a counter. You click on a button, it increases the counter. Nothing simpler than that. And let's say we want to change the behavior of the application a little bit, and we want to add points when someone clicks inside the div here, which is demonstrated here by this border. So now wherever I click, even if I click on a button, I increase the counter by 2. Right? Easy enough so far. And now let's think, well, I also do want to increment the counter when someone clicks on the button. So let's say we'll just add some logs to see what's going on. And then similar log here, div clicked, add 2 points. So if we reload now, if we click inside the border, we still get 2 points, right? And we get the correct log. If we click the button here, you can see that we have a message: button clicked, add 1 point, div clicked, add 2 points, but we actually added just 2 points. And so this one seems correct, and this one seems ignored. And when we look at the code and think about it for a second, it actually becomes obvious what's going on here. The counter here, this variable just becomes a number. There is no magic here happening. So, like, for all purposes, you could just replace this counter variable with just a number like this. And if you then think about the flow of execution, if we make it like this, then it becomes obvious that whichever one of these two functions is called last, then that value will be set to the counter. So if I call setCount 0 + 1 and then setCount 0 + 2, then the count will be equal 2. And this is exactly what's happening here. So I recently had a session with Eric Elliott, and he asked me a question related to this problem. He said, like, when would you stop using useState and switch to useReducer? And my answer was that, well, when the state becomes complex. That's not a very good answer, because complex state is not well defined. So we might be a little more precise here. And I think the better answer, turns out, is that you should switch to useReducer whenever you use a dependent state. And dependent state is basically what we are doing here. So if we just said here that when you click there, you set the value to 2, and if you click here and set the value to 5, then that's not dependent state, and that might be a correct use of useState. But whenever you want to set a new state but base it on the previous value of the state, it turns out it's much better to use useReducer, because that prevents you from doing those basically getting bugs in your components. And obviously this is a simplified example, but in a more complex component, you might end up having problems that are difficult to debug. You can imagine that maybe you started you as a developer just push the component that use a dependent state in one place, right? There is no chance of it introducing a bug. Or let's say later on someone else creates a change here and introduces a different place for changing the value. And they might not realize that it could conflict with what you've done previously. Anyway, so let's see how this behaves if we instead of using the set count and use state, if we introduce useReducer here. So we would like to have an initial state here defined as a counter equals 0. And we want the reducer function initial state. And then we want to have an action. We'll take it needs to have a type of a string. And payload, in our case, we'll just do any, which is ugly. There are some workarounds to get this work with TypeScript properly, but I haven't seen anything that really clicked and that really made a lot of sense without introducing a lot of extra boiler code. So I will show you guys how to do this better, but bear with me for now. So we want to switch on the action type. If we say increment, then we want the counter to be state counter +1. We want to also have another action called increment by, and this will take the payload action payload, and we'll be passing the number here as the payload. We also need the default case action not implemented. So we'll keep this one as increment, but here to make it a little more complex, we'll say increment by 2. So let's go ahead and do useReducer. Let's import that. The first argument here is the reducer. The second one is initial state. And we have state and dispatch here. So state counter, and then here, say useReducer in the log, so we know that we are using the newer version. It's very easy to make a bunch of refactoring and test it on the same version of the code that was previously and just think that everything works. So we want to dispatch type increment by payload 2. And then obviously we need to remove set count. Here we just say increment. Yeah, let's see if that works. Okay, so you can see now that if I click here in the border, it gives me 2 points. If I click here, it gives me 3 points. So that's because we basically queue up the actions, and so we have an array of actions, and we use the reducer to go through those actions one by one and then do the state transformations. But so there's a few things that I don't like about it. It's first of all, there's a lot of extra code just comparing to have useState, right? It's just way more. And then I never really liked using strings all around. So like the fact that there's a string here and it has to match this one, it makes refactoring difficult. And also things like type checking, like I cannot easily now verify that the payload here is a number. There are some things that you can improve here to have it a little nicer, but even the Redux guys in the end, they decided that this is good low-level mechanism, but they recommend now using the Redux toolkit that makes the code nicer and makes everything typed and beautiful. So I'll show you how you can use that. So the way to use useReducer with Redux toolkit is to use the create slice function. And to it, we pass an options object. The first thing we need is the name. The second one is the initial state. And the third one is the reducers object. So we need two actions here, two reducers. The first one is a simple increment. So we take the draft of the state, we add 1 to the counter, and then we also have increment by. And here what we want to do is we want to say action is a payload action of a type number. Oh, I messed something up here. Okay, let's import this. And now what we do is we just add the, whatever is in the payload. And this is already much nicer because everything is typed properly, and it was trivial to type it really. And you'll see in a second that when we try to call those things are also typed, those actions. So let's continue. Then we can remove now this. And then out of the create slice, we need to destructurize a few things. So we need the reducer, and then we want the actions. And it actually helps us. It gives us all the possible actions because it's properly typed. And now the reducer stays the same. Initial state stays the same. Stated dispatch, that's all the same. Now here in the dispatch, instead of dispatching the objects directly, we say increment by. And then you see that it's complaining. It wants an argument because we had an action defined here. And it also cannot be just anything. It has to be the number. So we want here to increment by 2. And let's say here use Redux toolkit. So in the logs, we verified that we are actually using this now. And then the same thing happens here. So we say increment. This one doesn't take any arguments. That should be it. So let's verify. Yep, I click inside. It's 2 points. Click here. It's 3 points, and it's using the Redux toolkit. So this is much better. I believe there's just less syntax, and I think it's less confusing. And the fact that we can use the drafts here to actually mutate the drafts of the state, and then Redux toolkit makes sure that the changes are properly applied. I think that's much better. And this is a very simple example, but you might have a state where you might have some array, and out of that array you want to find a specific object, or like maybe you'll do a find, and then after you find it, you might want to change some value, like make active or whatever to true. Like this will just work here, but with Redux or the default useReducer, you have to like destructurize the array and just like replace that one part of it with whatever you want it to be. It's difficult to even explain, but it's also very difficult to like do it in the code properly. There's just way less possibilities to make a mistake with a syntax like this, and it's also much easier to read. But there's still a few things that I do not like about this. One is the fact that I need to pass a name, and this is a tiny thing. It might seem like a tiny thing, but I'd rather have as little syntax as possible to achieve what I need. And the reason why the Redux toolkit requires the name here is because if you combine multiple reducers using multiple different create slices, the Redux needs to have this name to differentiate between those different slices. But if we are using useReducer in a component, then we would not combine different reducers in that way. If I want to have different reducers, different slices, then I would just have two useReducers here in my component. So they would not have a way to collide because they would be in a completely different objects. So that's one thing. I would like to just get rid of that. And the next thing is that I don't like the fact that I need to pass the initial state twice. So this one is used for typing, and this one is used for actually setting the initial value. I would rather do it once. And then I don't like the fact that I have to use the dispatch. I think that introduces extra noise that's not really related to what I'm trying to do here. This is just a syntax. There's no good reason to have it. So I've made a little package to just simplify this a little bit. So let's see. I created a hook that's called useComplexState. And there's just a package like this. And to it, you actually, it uses the same shape of options with that difference that you don't need to use the name here. You can use it. So like if you just copy and paste what you had already with create slice, it will just work with name. It will not complain, but you might as well skip it. And then here, instead of dispatch, we get the actual action creators. So we have increment and increment by, and they automatically call the dispatch. So we can remove all this. And now I can just remove the dispatch. Let's change the logs again to make sure that we are actually running this. So the use complex state. Let's see. Yeah, use complex state, 2 points, 3 points. So I hope this gives you guys a good overview of the different ways of dealing with dependent state. If you agree with my criticism of the Redux toolkit and would like to have the syntax a little smaller, then please go ahead and use complex state and let me know if you have any issues or any questions about it. I will be happy to help. And yeah, I think that's it. So thanks a lot.